Hello, dear friends. Today we will continue our journey through Otto Carius's memoirs. Don't forget to leave your opinion about this material and support this video with a like. Well, let's begin. The calm before the storm. The signs of an inevitable Russian offensive were becoming increasingly apparent. On the morning of February 28th, we carried out another maneuver against Russian anti-tank positions. The Russians had already made another attempt to install an anti-tank gun. According to infantry reports, they had already built a bunker in the embankment near the railroad crossing. The Russians did not allow themselves to be distracted by our direct strikes. Every evening, they built something new, just like moles. Without a doubt, the Russians surpassed us in the construction of field engineering structures. And all thanks to half-natural talent and half-diligent training. They always managed to dig in before we noticed them. It should also be noted that Russian anti-tank guns did not engage in a duel with us. The gun crew usually withdrew from their position before we had time to take up a good position. A few days later, we received a report from the Corps that a Russian radio transmission had been intercepted. It mentioned a ban on frontline units firing anti-tank guns and tanks on the bridgehead. From this, it was clear that they did not want to reveal their positions. Only in the event of a German attack on the bridgehead were they allowed to open fire. This order revealed two things. On the one hand, the Russians were clearly afraid of our tanks. On the other hand, it was clear that they had already deployed their tanks on the bridgehead. This clearly indicated their intention to attack. The tanks could be imagined in an attack. They were completely unsuitable for defense in the swampy forests, which made it impossible to change positions. It did not take any particular strategic talent to understand that the Russians would take any risk to attack the troublesome bridgehead at Narva from the south. We were terribly unlucky that evening. Rations had already been distributed, and we were chatting with our comrades when Russian bombers appeared in combat formation. As a rule, we didn't need to worry too much here, behind the front line. But this time, when the Russians dropped their bombs, clearly falling short, some of us crawled under the tanks, while the rest hurriedly scattered. A significant number of bombs fell among the Russians. One landed right behind one of my tanks. Both crew members under it were killed instantly by the shock wave. The men sitting on the tank were blown off it and escaped death, but suffered concussions. This unfortunate incident was another lesson for us, teaching us to remain vigilant even in relatively calm periods. As we lay in our bunker, still reeling from the shock of the event, the old saying that misfortune never comes alone was confirmed shortly thereafter. We had not been lying there for an hour when the sentry woke us up. We heard a suspicious crackling and rustling sound. A few idiots from another unit, who knew nothing about the Russian heating system, had lit the stove in the room above us. The sparks immediately set the thatched roof on fire. With great difficulty, we managed to escape from the burning house, which collapsed immediately afterwards. The Ivans, of course, opened fire on the clearly visible target. Needless to say, there was no such thing as even a halfway peaceful night. The next day brought new surprises. The first thing we did in the morning was to destroy the enemy's anti-tank gun, after which the Russians did not put anything in position. Observations showed that they had also brought artillery and heavy mortars to the front line and were occasionally firing at us. In the evening, after our air duty non-commissioned officer again gave the order for his bomber units to take action, we retreated. We found a small abandoned bunker in a forest clearing shaped like a postage stamp. It was located north of the road and 1,000 meters west of the burned-down house. It now became our place of rest at night. The tanks were positioned and well camouflaged among the trees, and we were more or less satisfied. However, that same night, a sentry reported that he could see the light of a large fire in the direction of our infantry strongholds, and that the units were under heavy fire. We immediately drove out and saw from a distance that the farmstead and 2 other strongholds were engulfed in bright flames. The Russians had fired incendiary shells at them to destroy our last shelter. I had long feared this. I had always been upset that at least trenches had not been dug between the 3 strongholds, if nothing else could be done. Naturally, our soldiers had to leave their shelters during the fire. They were lying in open terrain. The losses would have been even greater in daylight. The expected Russian attack never happened. They probably just wanted to improve their visibility. Fortunately for us, the houses in the Narva sector had stone foundations. They provided cover. The next night, the foundations had to be covered with new beams. This situation meant that we were completely exposed. We had to constantly watch the railway embankment so that the Russians would not take us by surprise. So far, they had shown no desire to engage us in intense firefights. This also indicated their intention to launch a large-scale offensive. By early morning, we had transported the seriously wounded back behind the children's home. We had already become jack of all trades for the infantry, saving them from even greater losses. However, the company's personnel had already been reduced to 10 to 12 people. Almost every night, I went to the regiment's command post behind the orphanage and asked the commander to strengthen the positions in our sector and dig trenches at night for this purpose. Unfortunately, my suggestions were not approved. In my opinion, everyone could already see that this was the weakest point of our front. But Major Haas was always concerned only about his 2 battalions in the boot, even though he should have seen that further east we had to cover the border area between 2 divisions. The enemy likes to choose such areas for an attack. After the houses burned to the ground, the situation became practically hopeless for the infantry in the event of a Russian attack on the highway from the eastern pocket. From then on, these 3 houses could be considered the ruins of 3 houses. I was finally able to organize the placement of a platoon of 4 well-camouflaged assault guns on the same level as the children's home, but to the east of it. 3 2-centimeter quadruple anti-aircraft guns also took up position 100 meters behind our estate. When the radio transmitter broke down, we drove to the children's home and picked up a new one. We also risked picking up provisions by moonlight. I may have gotten too carried away with this business. It would have been all over if we had lost the car during this venture. But what else could I do? After all, I had to help people as much as possible. They were grateful for this and sent us their best wishes long after that, when we were already working in a completely different area. We were also worried about our faithful Berman. Every morning he showed up punctually with hot coffee, even though he was risking his life by going on such a trip. We just couldn't bring ourselves to tell him that we would rather rest than drink coffee. The fact is that the Russians accompanied each of Berman's trips with bursts of heavy fire. One morning, he barely managed to escape. During the trip, he was caught in 2 explosions. In the end, he took my advice and stopped bringing the dangerous coffee. The infantrymen and anti-aircraft gunners were also happy. After all, it always took a good half hour from the moment Berman's car appeared until the Ivans calmed down and stopped firing like madmen. During one of those nights, an interesting event took place in our bunker. I myself became the center of attention. I must say that every night we were visited by an uninvited guest, the so-called cripple, or sewing machine. That's what we called Russian biplanes. These little planes flew back and forth behind the front lines, so low that we could almost reach out and touch them. In addition to hand grenades and mines, they dropped small bombs. These machines could also be called Kolyma bombers, because the engine always started to vibrate before the pilot dropped anything. He clamped the control stick tightly between his knees when he did this, so we already knew that something was about to be dropped, and we were prepared for it, unless, of course, we were asleep. However, one night we were fast asleep when one of these strange birds appeared. By chance, one of the bombs fell right at the edge of the bunker, raising a large cloud of dust. 2 guys were slightly injured by shrapnel. Everyone rushed out of the shelter, but when they saw that I wasn't outside, they came back. They found me lying there as if I were dead and started to undress me to see if I had been hit. And while they were undressing me, I woke up. I didn't have a scratch on me. I was sleeping so soundly, as if I were dead. Only a completely exhausted person can sleep like that. Today, all this may seem unbelievable, but even the most skeptical can be easily convinced by my Sergeant Kirchner. Even today, he still likes to recall this, in essence, curious incident. Frontline soldiers do not need a bed or sleeping pills to sleep soundly. Living in a tank for weeks on end is nothing special, nothing to make a big fuss about. It takes only a little imagination to picture what it was really like. The confined space and the bitter cold soon take their toll. Our health was put to an incredible test. We didn't even want to admit it to ourselves, but the results became apparent later. The moisture from our breath soon froze and turned into a thick, white ice growth. If any of the crew fell asleep and leaned their head against the tank wall, their hair would actually freeze to it when they woke up. To a certain extent, we could warm ourselves by huddling together and shivering with our whole bodies. The infantrymen in their positions hardly envied us. Our movements in the tank were limited, and we had no opportunity to warm ourselves by the stove. So I was not surprised when I once caught pleurisy, as the doctor later diagnosed. My left leg, which often rested against the wall of the tank, developed frostbite spots. The deceptive calm before the storm lasted until March 15th. On that day, we were hit by a mine. Until then, we had always managed to avoid being hit, thanks to skillful maneuvering. I radioed the company that the radiator was punctured and leaking. Fortunately, 2 vehicles had just returned from the repair shop and were operational. They were able to pull us out the next morning. Over the previous 2 days, the Russians had emerged from the depths of their stronghold each time with increasingly heavy weaponry. However, they did not open fire very often, and we decided that they were simply sighting in their guns. The infantrymen heard the frequent sounds of moving tracked vehicles behind the front line. They believed these were tractors pulling artillery guns. In any case, the striking silence of the previous 2 days was alarming. By evening, Sergeant Kepshap had towed my car back to our shelter. The next morning, on the 16th, Sergeant Major Pz.VI arrived with 2 cars to pull us out. Before dawn, I went with him to the peasant house and oriented him to the area. Then, towed by Kircher, we set off in the direction of the house. We were extremely happy that we could finally rest for a few days, wash, and sleep to our heart's content. Moving parallel to the front line along the western pocket, we passed the location of 3 vehicles under the command of Oberfeldwebel Göring. This was where the road turned north toward the motorway. His position was more advantageous than ours in the eastern pocket. The crews settled down for the night in a cemetery. The tanks were parked right next to the cemetery wall, and the men spent the night in a burial vault, which was lined with bricks and reinforced with beams. From the perspective of a person living in peacetime, this could be considered sacrilegious. But the laws of war often trample on the laws of peacetime. People were happy to squeeze into the frozen ground by any means available. Those who were unlucky enough to be later captured by the Russians had the opportunity to witness even greater sacrilege in cemeteries. Our forward support base and company commander were located at that time in Silemai, a town on the Baltic Sea coast, about 25 kilometers west of Narva and north of the highway. First of all, we greeted all our comrades in the company. We hadn't seen each other for a long time, and they barely recognized us with our beards. They had already heated up the sauna for us, which was located right on the shore. We were just eager to wash, which we hadn't done in so long. Then I had a meeting with the company commander. His tank was parked next to the house in front of the window to protect it from shrapnel. He did not give me a very warm welcome. "You're not wearing a tie again. No wonder I'm constantly having to reprimand someone when you set such a bad example. How can we expect to be respected if we allow ourselves to look like this?" It should be noted that I always wore only a black scarf. I knew that von Schiller didn't like that. His speech could not be called strict, but he spoke quite seriously. I said, "If the respect of my subordinates depends entirely on whether I am wearing a tie, then something is wrong with me." I had known von Schiller since I was a recruit. He immediately suggested that I address him informally after we arrived in Russia with the 502nd Battalion. He was my only commander in the battalion, but in fact, he never gave me any orders, knowing that I always acted on my own initiative, at least when left to my own devices, which was always the case at the front. The reason we addressed each other informally was also because I constantly had to be on the front line. In the presence of my fellow soldiers from our company, I observed military etiquette, and the informal form of address was no longer used. I was always between the company and its commander, and had to mediate for one side or the other. Anyone who claims never to have experienced an overwhelming feeling of fear has certainly never been at the front. Fear is a prerequisite for courage, just as the fear of death and uncertainty about the afterlife are prerequisites for the emergence and existence of any religion. True bravery consists in overcoming the fear of one's own death through an even greater determination to set an example for one's soldiers and support them. There was probably no one among us who was not afraid. Before some combat operations, I did not feel my best. But as soon as the tank started moving, I had no time to think about the danger. After the first shot was fired, my nerves calmed down on their own. Everything went haywire if we were nervous. During the battle, I often conveyed my inner calm to others with a joke during a brief radio communication session. Von Schiller should not have been surprised to learn that his subordinates did not like him, since he failed to impress them in battle. As a result, no one could stand his arrogance. Perhaps it served as a kind of self-defense for him. We knew each other too well to deceive each other. I forgave him for things that another close acquaintance would hardly have been able to forgive. It was impossible to demand the same tolerance from the soldiers. After all, it was taken for granted that they were fighting at the front, risking their lives for their country. Sometimes his criticism was entirely justified. There was a shameful incident involving the use of codes on the radio. Von Schiller briefly outlined the situation on the bridgehead to me. He looked at me reproachfully and said, "These games on the radio must be stopped. You are endangering not only your own people." I wisely remained silent. He was right, of course. I didn't know how, or rather, I simply didn't want to get used to stupid code names. During an operation, I had to say over the radio, "Nightcap," "Teeter," and similar messages. Our guys much preferred to address each other by name. Naturally, I used code names when radioing the battalion and the supply point. However, I addressed the people on the front line by their real names. Even more careless were the unofficial radio conversations. You could often hear on the radio, "What's the password for smokers?" This meant that cigarettes had become scarce again, and Otto Carius had to prove that he was a true friend. It should be noted that I was well supplied from home. 10 to 15 packs of cigarettes were delivered with each mail. I immediately distributed the packs among the tanks. The packs had short greetings to each person on them. The soldiers carefully preserved these greetings. The Russians, of course, were eavesdropping. Since the transmission was in plain text, when they heard the names of the same people, they immediately knew that the Tigers had appeared in a particular place. The code names changed after a few days at the latest, while our names, of course, remained the same. And the Russians would have noticed anyway if we had, say, left Nevel and appeared near Narva. We were a thorn in their side. Once, for example, they used a loudspeaker in the eastern pocket near Limbitu to appeal to our infantry to hand me over to them in exchange for 30 captured soldiers. They called on our soldiers to pacify the bloodthirsty dog who was constantly forcing them to defend themselves. My comrades in the infantry let the guy talk for a very short time, and when it became completely unbearable, they shot the loudspeakers. The Russians seemed to like the inappropriate expression, bloodthirsty dog. They stubbornly continued to broadcast over the loudspeaker again and again, which showed their respect for our battalion. After I was wounded at Dunaburg, the Russians announced on the radio that I had been killed. The Soviet officer who presented the lost tablet with my name on it as proof of his success was awarded a medal. My sergeant informed me of this in a letter to cheer me up. After all, everyone knows that those who are reported dead often manage to live longer than others. We naturally enjoyed our unexpected forced rest. The sauna gave us the opportunity to feel human again, and we felt as if we had been reborn. Thanks to this opportunity, I also got rid of my pleurisy and was completely healthy again. However, we had no idea how long our rest would last. At the front, you always want to take advantage of temporary blessings, pushing away thoughts of what will happen later and how long. Just as we were getting used to the cozy, warm room, a report came from Oberfeldwebel Pz.VI that the radiator on his Tiger had also leaked and the running gear of the second vehicle was damaged. The Russians were probably quite satisfied with damaging 3 of our vehicles. It is known that they had a grudge against Tigers. For the time being, Sveti remained in the village. In the event of combat, he could at least provide fire support to the infantry. I went to my guys from the maintenance crew to see how the repair of my radiator was progressing. I had no doubt that we had been sitting around doing nothing for quite a long time. The work that the repair platoon was doing cannot be described using familiar terminology. Nowadays, what they did with their hands would be described as something beyond human capabilities. This selfless work behind the front lines could not be organized by orders alone. On the contrary, it required inner conviction and a desire to help the troops at the front in every way possible. Pz.VI, commander of the repair platoon, could not be called an easy person to get along with. His positive qualities were hidden behind a very rough exterior. He often grumbled so much that his subordinates tried to change into their work clothes as quickly as possible. He treated his superiors in the same way, but we could not imagine what would have happened if his subordinates had allowed him to do the same to them. Deltsite, a first-class professional, used all his skills to repair the damaged vehicle. He was also a good comrade who never left his people in trouble. The situation in his platoon was much better than in all the others. During combat operations, the repair platoon worked day and night, and of course, were as steadfast as the soldiers on the front lines. If Deltsite promised to repair a vehicle by a certain time, you could count on him. People of this caliber are needed at the front. And did it really matter that someone was a little rough around the edges? Smooth talkers and nice guys are no good where you need to show what you're capable of. On March 16, 1944, our friend Deltsite acted in his usual demanding and trustworthy manner. After visiting the repair platoon's bunker, I learned that my tank would be ready by midnight. This meant that there were no obstacles preventing the other tankers from taking over. Our break lasted exactly 24 hours, but we made good use of it. I told Kircher's crew that they should not completely unpack their belongings. Instead, they should keep everything ready and lie down to get a few hours of comfortable sleep. Meanwhile, the other two companies and the battalion headquarters were sent to the Pskov area. We were left alone at our position near Narva. As it happened, I never saw Major Yed again. He was awarded the Knight's Cross on March 15th and then transferred to command a non-commissioned officer school in Eisenach. This meant recognition of his merits and a few steps up the career ladder, but the departure was certainly not easy for him. We didn't want him to leave either, because we had such a wonderful relationship with him. Comrades who were present when we celebrated his Knight's Cross and his departure told me later how difficult it was for Yed to part with the 502nd Battalion. He couldn't hold back his tears as each of his comrades shook his hand. After the war, I learned through indirect channels that the Russians had brought him to the so-called war crimes trial in Eisenach. I was never able to obtain information about the verdict. Unfortunately, all traces of him were lost. In the evening, we sat for a long time with von Schiller over a bottle of good schnapps. He couldn't understand why I wanted to lie down before leaving. He wasn't far off when he said that I would have a good opportunity to rest at the front, despite the inconveniences. Of course, the Ivans also added something in this regard. We knew all too well that the deceptive calm would soon come to an end. So I left my company commander and went to bed. We were going to leave at 4 in the morning. This way, our comrades could take their watch before dawn and get their patched-up vehicle out of sight of the Russians. I instructed the guard to wake me up. Unfortunately, I did not take into account his delicacy. When Kircher himself finally came to me at about 5 o'clock, I was still fast asleep. The guard stubbornly insisted that he had woken me up as ordered, and I even answered him. But now, I don't want to admit it. On top of that, I had a hangover. To make matters worse, I yelled at the innocent guard and rushed to my car. Everyone was already waiting for me there. Time was running out. We arrived at Sveti's position at 8 o'clock. He managed to disappear just before dawn. Communication with the infantry was in perfect order, and the battalion commander told me that the front was calm, so I went straight to bed. If we were needed, we were always on hand. The soldiers at the front also felt calmer when we weren't in their way, giving the Russians a reason to start firing wildly. That's all for today. If you like the video, please support it with a like and subscribe to the channel. See you all soon.